Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Art of Living Well podcast. What if everything you've been told about menopause is wrong? What if brain fog, weight gain, low energy, and feeling like you're falling apart aren't simply your destiny because you're getting older? Today, we're joined by Dr. Miranda Naylor, physician, hormone expert, and host of the Modern Women's Wellness podcast to talk about why menopause doesn't have to be a story of decline. We're diving into the myths around genetics, what your ovaries can tell you about your future health, and how this transition can actually become a powerful opportunity to reset your health, energy, and longevity.
Welcome to the Art of Living Well podcast. We're Marnie and Stephanie, and each week we share grounded, practical tools to help you feel strong, steady, and energized in midlife and beyond.
If you've ever thought, well, this is just what happens to women at my age, this conversation may completely change your perspective. Dr. Miranda, welcome to the Art of Living Well podcast. We are so excited to dive into this conversation with you. We know this is such a hot topic for many of our listeners, and we can't wait to see how you reframe menopause. And to start off, I'm wondering, what is something you believed about women's health, aging, or menopause early in your career that you've completely changed your mind about?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I feel like the biggest one is that our hormones are just stuck in stone. They are what they are. And in reality, now the way that I see it is that our hormones are signalers in our body, and they're so responsive to the health of our cells, the health of our body in general. The hormones are interacting with each other. And the story is so much more complex in a good way than just our hormones being annoying and they go away and then we're done. There's so much more power that we really can have with that.
There's so much hope in just that initial statement that you made. So let's just dive in. Many women in their 40s, 50s, even earlier, believe that menopause is the beginning to the end, right? It's the weight gain, the brain fog, poor sleep, the sweats, all that, and just feeling less like themselves. So why do you think we've accepted that narrative?
Oh my gosh. I think there are so many different layers to that, societal too. We're just, in our society, we frame it that way. We frame it as a decline. You're not young and vital anymore. You're just, to put it very bluntly, kind of like you're just taking up space now. You're not as important. And I'm not saying that that's true at all, but it's sort of this feeling about that. What's happening to you, even if you are a powerful CEO, someone who's changing the world, if you have to leave the room to go to the bathroom more often, or you're sweating, or, things are changing. It's like, there's not a place for that anymore. We don't have language around that. It's not normalized versus say someone who is pregnant. We're like, oh, of course she has to pee more often. Of course she needs to eat more. This is this big change in her body. In menopause, we're like, oh, something's wrong with you. What's going on? We don't have the knowledge or the language around it. So I think that's a huge part of it. And again, we've had this sort of like framing around, we prize the young, vital people, when in reality, there can be so much beauty and wisdom that comes out of the menopausal time period. There's a purpose for it that I think now we're in a place where a lot more women are realizing that we can take back that power and reframe the story around it.
Well, it's funny. It just made me think of this. But last night I was watching Friends and Neighbors. I don't know if either of you have watched that.
Yes.
And season 2,
I just started watching the second.
Amanda Peet, who's one of the main characters, these crazy like menopausal symptoms. And I was just cracking up because, now they're showing it on TV. Like everybody's talking about it, right? It's not this taboo thing anymore that it was when maybe our moms were going through it.
Yes. So funny. I just watched that last night too. And I was thinking the same thing. And it's interesting because they're talking about like kind of the men's side of it too and the women's side. And I was like, oh, I love that they're talking about it. Yeah. It's amazing.
And she was just cracking me up with the whole thing with the rage and like, it was funny. Anyway, so thinking about what women get wrong about menopause, what is a misconception that you think women hold that you really want to turn around and that you're seeing in your practice that would give you hope?
Well, one of the biggest things, again, was that it's just this decline time. And it comes with, yes, it does come with risk factors, cardiovascular disease, bone density loss, cognitive decline can come up with that. There are risk factors that do come up when we don't have estrogen, progesterone on board anymore as much. But again, it's just framing it as just that loss, just the negative symptoms, rather than the beauty that can come out of it too. Hey, you don't have a period anymore. You're so much more free. You don't care what people think anymore. These really beautiful things, but also how this transition can be, like, we can change the transition as well. So with the symptoms, we don't have to experience the same way that our mom, grandma experienced. We can have more control over it.
Are you loving this conversation and want even more ways to live your happiest, healthiest, and most authentic life? then we'd love for you to join our growing community on Substack. When you subscribe, you'll get bonus content and behind-the-scenes insights from us. Plus, you'll be the first to know about our upcoming programs and events. Your support helps us keep bringing inspiring guests and impactful conversations straight to you each week. So head to the link in our show notes, sign up today, and let's continue this journey together to create the art of living well. I look at this time for women as a way to reset, is to almost use it as a reason, or I don't say an excuse, but sometimes women, especially moms with kids and spouses and all that, feel like they have to provide an explanation for why they want to do certain things or make changes to their diet or their sleep or whatever it is. So how can women use this as a healthy reset? And maybe if you could draw upon any examples that you have from your patients, to really provide some hope and inspiration to those listeners out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I support women through all the hormonal transitions, basically. So, usually I'm seeing people maybe starting in their 20s or 30s, helping them get pregnant. I'm seeing them and supporting them through pregnancy, through postpartum, through maybe, several pregnancies, and then into perimenopause, menopause. And so I see women along this, all along the spectrum. And I see this as another hormonal transition, just like, going from pregnancy to postpartum. This massive shift in our hormones, a massive shift in what our body is doing. And we have to sort of come back to ourselves in a way that isn't just trying to get back to what we were before, because we're not the same. Our body has done something and we're in a new place, but we can still come back to vitality in that space. And so I see it the same way through perimenopause and menopause, where we shouldn't be trying to be like we were in our 20s. And that's a hard point for a lot of women. We're like, oh, the way that I controlled my weight for so long doesn't work anymore. The way that I managed my mood, whatever it is, it doesn't work anymore. But exactly like you said, this is opportunity for a reset then, to say, what does my body need now then? This has been a big change and now I'm in a new place. And what can I do differently to support my health? What can I do differently to find joy, to find vitality, to have fun? It is an incredible opportunity to just throw out what isn't working anymore and then find these new tools.
And I love a couple of things you said. It's almost like menopause can be a catalyst for hope,
Mm-hmm.
and you said something that I don't know if we talked about it on another podcast or I read or listened to it, but you just don't care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Women spend so much of their lives caring about what other people think. And now for the first time, and maybe, I don't know, like hormonally, what's going on, right? Is it the decline in estrogen where we're just like, we don't give a crap about what other people think of us, or maybe we're not trying to be perfect anymore, whatever that is. And so that is very freeing. In addition to, obviously we'll talk about some of the traditional physical hormonal symptoms that people associate with menopause, but I just thought that was interesting what you said.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces. And I'm early on, so I'm just 41 right now. But even just going into my 40s, it was funny. It was around 39 that I was like, oh my gosh, it kind of hit me. Not that I'm afraid of aging, but I was like, oh, this is my last year in my 30s. I almost felt like I had to make it something, like do something before I turned 40. But then once I did turn 40, I was like, okay, this is great. Like I'm still the same person. I'm in my 40s. I just don't care. And for me, as like a chronic people pleaser, I was like, this is the best. That I just felt that, I don't know, that tether that kept me feeling like I needed to be a certain way. It's like, you know what? I can do this how I want to do it. And that is absolutely so freeing.
Well, and wait till you hit your 50s, because I feel like every decade you just become more free as you age, and you just care even less. And sometimes I wonder if the rage, so I'm 53, and I would say I really have not had a lot of menopausal symptoms, thankfully. And I hope maybe it's because of the diet and the sleep and all the good things that I'm doing for myself. But the one I do have sometimes is rage. And I wonder if that rage is attached to that same emotion or whatever it is that makes me feel like I don't give an F. Like I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. Right.
Yeah.
Like I think it comes from the same place. It's so fascinating to understand that.
Yeah, it is a really interesting one. I also think about how women are just not allowed to have anger. They're sort of almost like allowable emotions for men and women traditionally. And it's not convenient, or, you're not being a good girl if you are angry. And so I also think about that, where how much anger do we have just sort of stored up in our body that eventually is like, it's got to come out. It's it's just sitting there. So yeah, I sort of wonder if maybe that's a piece of it too, where we're like, I'm just done holding this in. It needs to come out. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And as I think about the tools and what the advice we hear during this time, I'm curious to talk a little bit about hormone replacement therapy. I recently went to my OB-GYN and I told her that I was not having symptoms of during perimenopause. I haven't hit menopause yet. And I said, but from what I understand, it's really important to have some hormone in your body, and you have to have it kind of before you hit your 60s, if I'm understanding what I'm reading correctly. And she was like, well, if you're not having symptoms, what are you treating? So I guess I'm confused, because from what I understand, as the estrogen declines, you need that hormone in your body for your bones and for your brain health and all these other things. And, and then you can talk about testosterone too, which is a totally separate hormone. So what is a person to do if they're not having the symptoms, but I'm still having the decline in the estrogen?
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a normal transition, and some people just choose to have that transition. That's okay also. It's not something that has to be treated per se. But like we mentioned, some of those risk factors that come up with menopause, they are associated largely with not having estrogen anymore. When our estrogen declines, then we don't have the same input to our brain, to our bones, to our muscles. Pretty much every tissue in our body, our skin included, has receptors for estrogen. So there can be risks that come up with that, with not having as much estrogen, regardless of we're having symptoms or not. So it's interesting that your doctor, the way that she framed it, is a very conventional medical way of.
And she is conventional.
Yeah. It's this like, we need a disease to treat. Like that
Yes.
is how the conventional model works. And in functional medicine and integrative medicine, we're saying, well, how can we support health? How can we optimize our health regardless of if disease is present yet or not? Hey, can't we prevent it? That would be fantastic. So that's the boat that I'm in. Hey, I always recommend checking your hormone levels, seeing where you actually are.
Which I've done.
Yeah. And especially if you're not, for someone who maybe hasn't done that and they're not symptomatic, check in where you are. But hormone replacement therapy could still be a supportive tool if you just are looking at your longevity and you're saying, hey, I'd really like some extra support to push those things off, especially if you have, cardiovascular disease in your family, if you have osteoporosis in your family, if you personally have had insults to your bone development or growth or, decline over the years, then you may have even more reasons to say, hey, this is a tool that I want to use to support my longevity, even if I'm not having any symptoms.
So how often would you recommend someone, say 40 and beyond, even if they don't have any perimenopause symptoms, having their hormones tested in a full hormone panel and looking at the ratio, the estrogen to progesterone ratio, which a lot of doctors don't necessarily focus on?
So I personally check them at least yearly in my patients. It's kind of as part of our big yearly panel, because again, regardless of whether we're having symptoms or not, oftentimes our body will tell us when something is off, but it's great to know where we are. And sometimes we can see something changing, that we wouldn't see otherwise. So I think it's amazing to check. And that's one that's sort of one of my pet peeves, is that I have so many patients come to me. They're like, oh, my doctor said that it doesn't matter. I shouldn't check my hormones because they change all the time.
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, of course they do. But that's why we then try to get them on a certain day. Like day 3 is where I usually check a good baseline of hormones, and we can at least see the range. And I'm never going to say, oh, your hormone was this on one day, and I'm just assuming that it's then always like that. Mm-hmm. Of course not. That we have some blind spots unless we're checking hormone levels every single day throughout the cycle, but it still gives us a lot of great information to say, okay, you're having, XYZ symptoms that are associated with higher estrogen, for example. Oh, we saw that your estrogen is high. Okay, we can put those two things together and come to a conclusion that your estrogen is running high, or, the opposite, it's running low, whatever. So I think it's very helpful.
So in a person like myself, what are your preferred hormone replacement therapies, knowing that every person is different, and someone that I guess is looking to be as natural as possible, but still get the benefits?
Yeah. Well, typically, to kind of walk it through in terms of when they're usually coming into play, usually I'll start with progesterone. When a woman is in perimenopause, again, particularly if she's symptomatic, especially she's having heavier periods, more painful periods, more PMS symptoms, moodiness, anxiety before her period. Those are kind of the ones we're seeing come up then. And usually we're starting with progesterone in a cyclical fashion, meaning taking it when you're in your luteal phase, so after ovulation, before your period, so that we're really just staying with your cycle, but giving you some extra support where you need it. And it's not to say sometimes we're doing other things to support progesterone there as well. Stress management can be huge there. But that's where we might bring in the first hormone replacement. And then estrogen usually comes up later, because usually in early perimenopause, our estrogen is actually running higher before it declines. But then once our cycles are becoming longer, maybe we're not having regular periods, then maybe we're seeing some decline, or someone's maybe having vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, that's usually a sign that our estrogen is starting to decline or become more erratic. That's where I might bring in estradiol, and usually do that through a patch form. So transdermal, because our body tolerates that better than taking it as a pill. We have a little bit higher risks that come up with taking an oral form of estrogen. So I prefer transdermal or a cream, something like that, patch or cream.
And how long is a typical person on all these hormones? So once they don't have a period for a year, are you just like, okay, we don't have to worry about it anymore? Or is there any risk or harm to be on these indefinitely, based on other symptoms that they may be having?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. So we're all different. There's no exact rule of thumb. I would say on average, 5 years is a pretty like normalized average of how long someone might have symptoms through menopause. And so, that might be kind of the general average, but again, it depends, especially on someone's desires. Some people just don't want to be on it long term. They want it for a little bit of support and then they want to get off of it. Great. Some women feel amazing. This is the larger population, feel really good on the hormones. We're monitoring them. We're making sure that their levels are good, erring on the side of less is more, really just seeing what do we need to get the symptoms to go away? What do we need to help you have levels that are going to be really supportive of your health? And then I really don't see any big issues with being on them long term. Again, because I'm doing it in a way where we're really watching their levels. We're making sure they're not higher than a normal physiologic level would be, meaning that throughout her life, her hormones have been much higher than they are there. Then again, depending on the person, sometimes we do have someone on them for a longer period of time. This week, I just had one, or just yesterday, who was like, she's still early on, but she's feeling incredible with like just progesterone supplementation so far. I've had so many where one in particular, kind of in probably like when she first started coming to me was like in the later years of perimenopause. So, those longer cycles. Interestingly, we did more of the foundational lifestyle nutrition things first, which I usually like to start with, and maybe some herbal support, things like that. Again, supporting a woman's body and being able to do what it can naturally first. And already like her cycles became more regular, which was really surprising. And we're like, oh, actually you kind of went backwards a little bit in that her cycles were a little bit more regular. And then of course started, after a few years, started to stretch out again. And then, I would say now she's still like early menopause, maybe like 2 years out in menopause, but she was actually really surprised the menopausal transition was very smooth, that she didn't really have, she was kind of expecting to have more dramatic symptoms that she didn't really have. And it's feeling good, being able to do all the things she loves to do and feel energetic and active. So, yeah.
So can you expand on some of those lifestyle changes and practices that you mentioned that you always start with? Because I think sometimes there are a lot of them are simple, but not easy for people to implement. And I think a lot of women, I don't know if they discount the positive effect that they can have and just jump right to wanting the HRT or wanting some sort of pill or even a supplement that they see. Because now the supplements for hormones in women in menopause are popping up all the time on social media. I mean, I always have clients like, oh, have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? I'm like, I can't keep up with the latest supplement. I don't know. Like I know the sort of gold standard that have been used for a while, but there's new brands popping up all the time. So maybe you can just talk about those lifestyle changes and how important they are and what you've seen in your patients who have made those changes.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, well, so the foundational things are boring and mundane and not sexy. And I feel like that's why people don't, we want to skip over to the quick pill. We want that quick win. Yes, those things can help, but they're never going to completely replace the foundations. Those things include, nutrition, getting enough food, which I think we forget about sometimes, getting, a variety of plants, color in our diet, variety of different spices, herbs, things like that, getting enough protein, getting enough hydration, just drinking enough water so our body can do what it needs to do and our functions can work. Stress relief is another huge one, making sure that we're not always in like redlining and pushing and going, really making sure that we have, non-sleep rest time, that we're taking things off of our plate. We're working on even our mindset and the way that we support ourselves. I love talking about joy, awe, community here also, because we like to skip over those also. And they're literally like community alone. If you do nothing else, if you have community, there was interesting to have, as an aside, there was this Italian community, and I can't remember the exact study, but they studied this community that was a very tight knit community, and they drank and they smoked and they did all the bad things that you shouldn't do, quote unquote, for your health. And their disease risk was so much lower until the community started to dissolve. People moved away, the community wasn't as tight. And then all of a sudden their cardiovascular risk and all those things jumped up. So community is so powerful, I think, especially for women. Other things, movement, of course, not even talking about exercise, but just moving in our day, not being sedentary, ideally moving in ways that feel really fun to you, I think is a really good bonus. And working our muscles, of course, to support our longevity as well. Sleep, of course, getting good restorative sleep is so crucial. We need that to produce hormones, repair our body, all of that. So again, so boring. We like to just stay up and watch Netflix instead of get that sleep that we need, but it's so critical.
And those are things we talk about.
Mhm.
Yeah, we talk about those often. And, they're the foundations, right, to our health. Yet so many people struggle with these foundational items. And I think living in the United States, we're not necessarily set up for success the way our country operates. I was just abroad for the last couple weeks and it was very interesting to see. I was in Croatia and I was on the coast, and the healthy diet and the community and they had signs everywhere telling people to get off their cell phones, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah.
There was such a big lifestyle difference between the US, and granted I was on vacation, but I talked to a lot of locals and they're living the way we need to be living. And I can't understand how we got so off track in the United States.
Yeah, it's so sad. It is interesting. We talk about the Mediterranean diet a lot because it really is the gold standard for the
Yes.
best diet for inflammation and all these things. But in the Mediterranean, again, they're not just eating those foods. They're eating those foods together. They're eating those foods in a social, celebratory setting. And the foods themselves are just better quality too. Like they're maybe directly from a garden. They're directly from the ocean. They're not so heavily processed, so, far removed like they are in the US. It is, really unfortunate that you have to work so hard to be healthy nowadays rather than just being the default way to live anymore.
Right. Well, it's just like you have to buy food that's organic when historically and overseas, all food is organic because it's not sprayed with the pesticides, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could just talk about this all day. We're not going to probably solve that issue, but
I'm just saying it's hard for people and women in general. And then you add children to the mix and a job and running a household and all these other things. And I can understand where your sleep and your nutrition and your stress and all these things can fall off. So it's like, how do we create this system or framework where we can maybe do some of this and still live in the United States and make it all work?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where community comes in, and finding people that are on a similar path as you, or, it's like surrounding yourself with the people that you sort of want to become more like, right? That are going to help you along in this path when it gets a little hard. So I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. Maybe Marnie mentioned we have this, idea that I'm just following along with my mother's path. So she had horrible menopause symptoms, so I'm going to have horrible menopause symptoms, and I'm just it's like a rite of passage. Like I just have to deal with it. So can you talk a little about like the genetic component versus more epigenetics? And it probably feeds into what we were just talking about with all those lifestyle changes and just the mindset shift that is really powerful once we get over this belief that my genetics are determining my destiny when it comes to menopause.
Yeah. In truth, genetics only play about 50% of a role in when we go through menopause. But otherwise, it is dependent on our environment, our lifestyle factors, like you mentioned, those epigenetic factors. And I like to highlight here the difference between chronologic age and biologic age. Basically, chronologic age is our age on the calendar. It's when our birthday was and where we're saying where we are in age years. But biologic age is the aging process on our cells. And now we are even talking about ovarian age, which is the aging process on our ovaries, which actually is what is impacting when we quote unquote run out of eggs and our fertility window closes, when we go through perimenopause and menopause, and even what that experience looks like, because it impacts our hormone levels, what our tissues are able to produce and pump out before they're, finally done. So that's where we have a lot of power. And that this can absolutely change. Even, again, our environment too, just the environmental things can have a huge impact. And then also just the way that we're living our lives. I know that, the test company Function, which is very popular nowadays, they have a biologic age. I don't know exactly what they're using to calculate that. Basically, they have different models and they'll use different tests, like even like your metabolic markers, things like that, to determine what sometimes they'll call it metabolic age versus, biologic age. And so there can be variability with that. And I think the big point here is that maybe we just still don't really know. I know a little more detail with ovarian aging because this test just came out for that.
Okay.
Called Menotime. They literally just released this year, and it's actually an AI machine learning model that they're basing it off of AMH, estradiol, and FSH, and then also putting in lifestyle factors. You fill out a quick survey that includes, your stress levels, things like that, some of your hormonal symptoms. And they're basically running this model. I think they have like over 1,000 different like pathways they're running for each person, and are able to predict with, it seems like, really pretty good certainty, maybe within a year or so, your ovarian age as well as your date to menopause. Now, it's still new. So my big question, so kind of similar to yours, is, well, then how much, there are things that we can do to change, and they do have some studies associated particularly with their model that we can see that can change things. But time will tell to be able to say, once we have several women going through it and seeing, like, is their age jumping all over the place? Is it very steady? How much is it actually changing? Time will tell. But it is, I feel like there's still benefit to it, because as long as it's not going all over the place like yours, and we're like, wait, now I don't even believe this. I feel like it can give us some feedback rather than just guessing. And, again, going back based off of our mom's menopause date, to be able to say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing in my life. This is what it's showing. Maybe I make some changes and I check it in, 6 months to a year, and ideally see that go down. And at least you have something to go off of. Again, rather than just guessing, feeling like, there's no way to know, because especially as women, I feel like we need to have a little bit of proof to say, okay, this is what I need to be doing. If it's all floating in the air, then we're like, well, maybe I don't really need to get that 8 hours of sleep. Maybe I don't have to, be eating the vegetables, whatever it is. I feel like the justification sometimes isn't quite there, but we're a little bit more motivated. We're like, oh my gosh, my age is a little bit older than I am. I need to do something about that. So there's definitely power in that too.
Summer is here, and if you're feeling a little sluggish after spring celebrations, graduation parties, travel, or just a few too many treats, now is the perfect time for a reset. Our Do It Anytime Vitality Reboot is designed to help you feel energized, refreshed, and back in control of your health without extreme restrictions or complicated protocols. This self-paced program helps support detoxification, improves digestion, reduces cravings, boosts your energy, improves sleep, and jumpstarts healthy habits that actually stick. You can start anytime and move at your own pace. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more and join us today. Totally. And how does ovarian age connect with other, like, brain health or longevity, cardiovascular health, like specifically for women?
Yeah, well, just like our hormones are impacting all of those things, our ovarian longevity, our ovarian health can also impact those things, because they are what are producing the signals to keep those things more vital, keep the estrogen going, all of that. And I also see it as a really big window. Some of it may be correlation, not causation, meaning it may not be that ovarian health is causing the other things, but they definitely are closely correlated, because as our ovaries are aging, or if we're having more rapid aging of our ovaries and going into menopause earlier, then we know we then have an increased risk of things like cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, osteoporosis. So there is that strong correlation there too.
Super interesting. I like just thinking about myself as I'm approaching menopause, right? Like my periods are further and further spread out. I don't know that test would necessarily matter for me. Like, I don't know why I would do it at this point. I'm curious if there would be a reason why things are going pretty well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think very clear cut, the best population to do it is women maybe in their 30s, especially those who are, maybe they haven't had children yet, but they want to. Right. I feel like this is where the population that will really benefit from this kind of testing. And I agree with you, in perimenopause, especially late perimenopause, we don't really know how much we can change it at that point. It depends on the person. I've had some women who want to do it still because they're like, well, maybe I'm 5 years out from menopause. Maybe I'm 10 years out. I don't know. They want to have a little bit of data there still. But if you're doing all the things anyway, you're already kind of in it, you're not necessarily trying to make a huge change in the time difference, then, you don't necessarily need to. And I feel like that's for any test or tool. I feel like it's important to understand, what is it going to do for you? Yeah. More information isn't always better. Sometimes it's just more information, but if it's going to give you that information that you need to make a certain change, that's where the power is.
I agree. So, can we go back to HRT again for a few minutes? I'm wondering, a lot of people are very reluctant to go on HRT because it was all the rage in the, I don't know, was it the 90s or something? It was like when my mom was at that age. And then they pulled it back and said, it's terrible for you. If you've had cancer, you shouldn't go on HRT. I don't know if that's all cancer, if it's just breast cancer. What are the risks that you are concerned about when women come to you interested in going on HRT? What do you want to know from them? What do you go through with them so that they know what they're getting into, or maybe they don't know what they're getting into, and what do you want to address with them?
Yeah, well, to address like the reason why our ideas have changed about hormone replacement is that basically there's this big study, the WHI study, that basically said, oh, they cause cancer and they're terrible. But there were a lot of problems with that study. And more recently, it's become very public that the way that they were looking at that data was incorrect. And the types of hormones they were using were synthetic. So they were not actually bioidentical, what our body perceives as our actual hormones, our estrogens, our progesterone. So there were a lot of flaws. And now we can say with certainty, no, that's not actually the case. You don't have increased risk of cancer. A lot of the things that they were making us afraid of are not actually the truth. So, they are very safe and effective if used appropriately, which is the important note.
So I was just wondering what you go over with a woman who's interested in HRT to know that they're a good candidate for it and that they are aware of risk factors if there are any.
Yeah, so there can be risk factors, just like anything really. Now, again, I recommend bioidentical hormones in my practice because we know the risk factors are lower, the benefits are better. So that's what I always recommend. With those, we talk about things like risk of breast cancer, things like that, which again, aren't really there, but we still have to talk about how estrogen and progesterone can affect breast cancer. So basically, for example, a woman who has breast cancer, had breast cancer, especially one that is estrogen and progesterone sensitive, or say just estrogen sensitive, whatever, which I have several women like this in my practice where the estrogen is not causing the cancer. Hormones don't cause cancer, but cancer cells can use them for fuel, just like cancers can use other things for fuel. Our bodies use glucose for fuel. Yeah, so can cancer cells. So it's that type of relationship. So we're always talking about that, especially even just to ease someone's worries. Now, again, to go back to that example of a woman who has had cancer, especially that's hormone sensitive, that is the big gray zone that we're still, there's a big question mark there of, is it appropriate or not? Some people think it is, especially if we need to use it to combat other symptoms or, things like osteoporosis. But there's still a lot of we don't know because that population hasn't really been studied enough to say for sure that maybe we can't, reawaken an old cancer or something like that. So that's gray zone. For the average woman, we're talking about, do you have family history of breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis? Again, those things that would make us feel more cautious about hormone replacement or more encouraged that we should use hormone replacement to decrease the risk factors. I feel like those are the biggest ones. Again, I mentioned when appropriate also. I always want to see someone's hormone levels before we're starting. I want to talk about their symptoms to make sure that that's the right fit. I've had now 2 close friends who have been started on estrogen in perimenopause. And I'm like, this one friend in particular, I was like, you're having all these signs of high estrogen. Why did she put you on just estrogen and not progesterone? Yeah. She was feeling worse and then stopped it herself. And I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah, I thought you always don't you kind of need both to be balanced?
Yeah, I always recommend it. It does depend on the situation a little bit. If someone is like making their own progesterone
right,
or short term, maybe doing a little bit of estrogen on its own. But for the most part, we always want to have progesterone with estrogen. And the reason for that is even just their ways of working. Estrogen promotes growth. It's sort of, I relate it to the yin and yang. Estrogen is that growth, yang, like fire, let's get things going. And then progesterone is the calming, balancing one, and they work together. So if someone is having a lot of estrogen for a long period of time, then yeah, that could create an environment that's a little bit more pro-growth that we don't want. And so we want to have that balance.
That was a good analogy. I like that yin and yang. And that makes sense because so many people have told me they started taking progesterone, which has helped with their sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So Miranda, maybe you can pivot a little bit and start talking about how you work with your patients. And specifically, I know you have a very unique philosophy. I think it's called RISE. And talk about that a little bit, because I think that could be important even for people that can't necessarily see you in person, but just understanding this approach and maybe share, can people see you remotely? Like, could people around the country, if they don't live in California, be a patient?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So yeah, I primarily have a functional medicine practice, which like you said is called the RISE method. Basically, those steps are reveal, where we're understanding these things, really doing the testing, talking at length about what's going on with them, integrating. So we're looking at their tests, we're talking about those pieces, integrating that all together so that it's not just all this information, but they're able to integrate it into their life. They're trying to make those, routines and those habits. They're going to support their life ongoing. Then S is support, where we're supporting them in the things that we're finding, putting them on very approachable, actionable protocols so that we're addressing the things that need to be addressed so that they can feel their best. And then E is evolve, where life continues to happen and we keep following that. We get someone to a maintenance point and they're feeling great, but something can change, something can happen. We continue to, go down that menopause journey and something is, else comes up. So we're always evolving and moving along with them on their health journey. So yeah, so it's kind of how I support them. I do primarily see patients in California. That's where I'm licensed. But we do have some ability to coach people outside of California throughout the US. So if anyone is out of California, then you can still reach out to us and we'd still be happy to support you. We also have the Menotime test now available in our practice. And so that's something that I love to offer too, for someone who's like, hey, I can't find someone who offers this and I just need that information as part of, the other things I'm doing. That we're also happy to empower women with that.
And I think you have a free hormone quiz as well, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's on my website, drmirandanaylor.com/quiz. And yeah, you can find out if you are having some hormonal symptoms that you're not really sure what's going on, what it's trying to tell you. Then you can take that quiz. It's very fast and we'll give you some actionable tips again about where it looks like, your hormone pattern is pointing you to.
Fantastic. And Miranda, as we wrap up this conversation, one thing we love to ask all of our guests is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
I think it's really a summary of what we were talking about with the foundations. I feel like the art of living well is finding the beautiful way that you want to express your life and how you want your health to show up for that. So being able to find those tools that you love doing, that help you feel great, that support your well-being, that you can just do ongoing for the rest of your life.
I love that, because so many women I too find themselves doing things because they think they should do them, and they're actually not experiencing joy and even gratitude from how their body is functioning and just more organically going through life, right? Versus just this push and pull all the time.
Yeah, the long list of shoulds.
A long list of shoulds. I'm like, if you find yourself out there saying should on a regular basis, you got to dump it. You just got to get rid of that word from your vocabulary.
I agree completely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is such a hot topic and with our listeners. So we know a lot of people out there are going to really benefit from today's conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Such an honor to be here.
And if today's conversation resonated with you, we would love to hear from you. Send us a DM on Instagram or reply to our Substack newsletter and tell us, what belief about menopause are you ready to leave behind? And if you know a woman who thinks menopause means inevitable decline, please share this episode with her. The more we can normalize these conversations and empower women with information, the more we can help women thrive and not just survive through this transition. And thank you for being here. And thank you for being a part of our Art of Living Well community. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Art of Living Well podcast. If today's episode inspired you, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It helps more people discover our show.
And if you're ready to take your health and happiness to the next level, we would love to support you. Whether it's through our transformative group programs, personalized coaching, or functional medicine lab testing, we help uncover the root causes of your health challenges and unlock your vitality.
Visit www.theartoflivingwell.us to learn more and book a free discovery call. Until next time, keep creating your art of living well.